A racist cop tried to silence her again. He threw her in prison years ago, but today at the same bus stop, she's back. And the badge she carries now is not the one he expected. The air in Sterling Creek still tasted of last night's rain. A cool, damp scent of wet earth and pine needles hung in the early morning mist, a stark contrast to the oppressive humidity that would soon settle over the town. At the corner of Oak and Elm, beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree, Amara Vance stood motionless. She was 30 now, though the quiet intensity in her dark eyes held a wisdom far beyond her years. Dressed in a deep blue hoodie and black leggings, with a worn leather backpack slung over one shoulder, she could have been anyone. A student, a traveler, a local heading to an early shift. But she was none of those things. She was a ghost. The bus stop was little more than a weathered wooden bench, its surface carved with the initials of forgotten lovers and teenage rebels. It was a place of transit, of waiting, of quiet patience. A few other early risers shared the space, their presence adding to the tableau of small-town life. An elderly man in a faded Vietnam veteran's cap sat on the far end of the bench, his gaze distant. Two women, one white, one Latina, shared a hushed conversation near a humming soda machine, their laughter like tiny bells in the quiet air. A lanky teenager with headphones bounced a tennis ball against the curb, lost in his own rhythm. They all noticed Amara. Their glances were fleeting but charged. A flicker of curiosity here, a shadow of unease there. It wasn't hostility, not exactly. It was the cautious, guarded look people give when confronted with a memory they'd rather leave buried. Amara felt their eyes on her, a familiar weight on her skin, but she didn't acknowledge them. Her focus was fixed on the street ahead, her posture straight, her breathing slow and even. She was waiting for more than just the 7:15 bus. She was waiting for history to repeat itself. 5 years. It felt like a lifetime and a heartbeat all at once. 5 years since she'd last stood on this corner, a different woman entirely. The town of Sterling Creek prided itself on its memory for football victories and church bake sales, but it had a convenient amnesia for its sins. Most of the faces here were new, or they had simply chosen to forget. But Amara remembered every detail, every lie, every tick of the clock in that courtroom. A pickup truck rumbled past, its tires hissing on the damp asphalt. Then another. Then the silence returned, thick and heavy. The mist clung to the leaves of the old oak, making the world feel small and enclosed. And then she heard it. Not the roar of a truck, but the low, predatory growl of an idling engine. The slow crunch of tires pulling over to the curb. A black and white patrol car, the town's seal, an eagle clutching a bundle of arrows, emblazoned on its side. Amara didn't turn her head, but her body tensed, a coiled spring of anticipation. The car door opened with a sharp click, and he stepped out. Officer Cade Schmidt. He moved with the same arrogant swagger she remembered, his chin thrust forward, his chest puffed out as if the sidewalk itself owed him deference. He wore the familiar khaki shirt and dark brown trousers of the Sterling Creek PD, his duty belt laden with the tools of his trade. A holstered pistol, a taser, a pair of handcuffs. He hadn't aged a day, but the cruelty in his eyes seemed to have deepened, etched there by years of unchecked power. He scanned the small crowd at the bus stop, his gaze sweeping over them with casual disdain. Then his eyes landed on Amara. For a fraction of a second, he froze. Recognition hit him like a physical blow, a flicker of shock that he quickly masked with a sneer. He had buried her, he thought. He had erased her. Yet here she was. Well, he drawled, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, a performance for the small audience. Look what the cat dragged in. Didn't think we'd be seeing your face around here again. Amara remained silent, her eyes still fixed on the road ahead. She didn't even grant him a blink. Her stillness seemed to infuriate him more than any shouted insult could have. He took a few deliberate steps closer, his boots crunching on the gravel at the edge of the road. The quiet conversation ceased. The teenager stopped bouncing his ball. Even the old veteran on the bench turned his head slightly. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Schmidt's voice dripped with condescending amusement. I asked you a question. Still, she didn't respond. She just stood there, a pillar of calm in the storm of his presence. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially not by someone he considered beneath him. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He closed the distance between them until he was standing directly in front of her, invading her personal space, forcing her to either look at him or look away. Loitering, he declared suddenly, the word sharp and accusatory. That's a violation of Town Ordinance 12B. Slowly, deliberately, Amara turned her head and met his gaze for the first time. Her eyes were not filled with the fear he remembered, but with a cold, hard clarity that seemed to unnerve him. I'm waiting for the 7:15 bus, Officer Schmidt, she said, her voice low but firm, each word perfectly enunciated. He smirked, recovering his composure. You got some ID on you? She didn't move, didn't reach for her bag. She just held his gaze, an unspoken challenge passing between them. He leaned in, a tactic meant to intimidate, to loom over her. It had worked 5 years ago. It wasn't working now. Funny thing, he said, his tone shifting to one of mock reminiscence. Last time I saw you standing around this corner, you were causing a whole lot of trouble. Didn't end so well for you then, did it? The air grew thick with unspoken history. Amara's expression didn't change, but her eyes held the story. The betrayal, the humiliation, the cold steel of prison bars, and the 3 years of her life stolen from her. She had let him write her story once. She would not let him write the ending again. Sensing the shift in atmosphere, the Latino woman near the soda machine took a step back, pulling her friend with her. Vámonos, she whispered. Esto no es bueno. Let's go. This is not good. Schmidt shot her a sharp glare. You got a problem? He snapped. The woman flinched and shook her head, quickly looking down at her shoes. He had re-established his dominance over the herd, but the lioness in front of him remained unmoved. He turned his attention back to Amara. You'd be smart to just move along, he advised, his voice a low threat, before I find a reason to put you right back where you belong. Amara took a deep, steadying breath, and then, for the first time that morning, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. I'm not the one who's going to have a problem today. Officer, she said softly. And in that moment, Cade Schmidt felt a sliver of doubt, a cold prickle of uncertainty. This was not the same scared girl he had broken 5 years ago. This was someone else entirely, and she wasn't afraid of him anymore. The silence that followed Amara's quiet declaration was profound. It was no longer the peaceful quiet of an early morning. It was the taut, humming silence of a high-voltage wire, crackling with unspoken tension. Cade Schmidt stood his ground, his feet planted on the pavement like he was trying to physically will his authority back into existence. He narrowed his eyes, trying to dissect her, to find the crack in her composure, the flicker of fear he so desperately needed to see. But Amara gave him nothing. No apology, no retreat, just that unnerving calm. Something amusing to you? He snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Amara's faint smile vanished, replaced by a neutral, almost clinical expression. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound from the back of his throat. I see you're still the same defiant little thing you always were. Always so good at playing the victim, weren't you? Even when we both knew the truth. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was as steady as a surgeon's hand. You mean the truth you manufactured? The evidence you planted in your report? The lies you told under oath? She said it without raising her voice, but the words landed like hammer blows in the quiet air. Schmidt took an involuntary step back, his carefully constructed facade cracking for a split second. His eyes darted to the onlookers. The old veteran was now standing, leaning on the bus stop sign, watching with an intensity that made Schmidt's skin crawl. The two women by the soda machine were staring, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. And the teenager, the damn kid, had his phone out, held sideways, the small red light of the camera glowing like a malevolent eye. You better watch your mouth, Schmidt hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Accusing a police officer of a felony, that's a serious crime. Amara raised a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. So, is committing one, she replied, her voice unwavering. His face, already ruddy, darkened to a deep, angry crimson. He hadn't expected this. He had expected tears, pleas, or at the very least, a cowed submission. The girl he remembered from 5 years ago would have crumbled by now. The girl who had sobbed in the back of his patrol car, who had begged the jury to believe her, who had stood, shackled and broken, as her freedom was stripped away by men who wore the same uniform he did. But this Amara was a stranger. She wasn't here to plead for justice. She was here to serve it. He tried to regain control, to fall back on the familiar rituals of power. He pulled out his notepad, the leather worn and cracked, and clicked his pen with an aggressive snap. "Name?" he demanded, as if he didn't know it as well as his own. Amara didn't answer. "I said, 'What's your name?'" he repeated, his voice rising, betraying the panic that was beginning to bubble beneath his surface. She tilted her head slightly. "I think you remember it, Officer Schmidt." He hated the way she said his name, with that quiet, steely emphasis. It wasn't a title of respect. It was an accusation. He scribbled something meaningless on his notepad, then reached for the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7, he said, his voice artificially calm. "Got a 10 to 54 at the corner of Oak and Elm. Suspicious individual, female, non-compliant. Possible 10 to 16. Obstruction." Amara took a single step forward, a small but significant advance. "I'm not obstructing anything. I'm a citizen waiting for public transportation." Schmidt's lip curled in a sneer as he looked her up and down. "So you think you can just waltz back into this town, stand on my corner like nothing ever happened?" "That's exactly what I'm doing," she confirmed. He moved in again, his body language screaming aggression. "I ought to run you in right now." "On what grounds?" she asked, her tone genuinely curious. For attitude, the onlookers shifted uncomfortably. The seeds of doubt were being sown. They had seen this performance before, this casual abuse of power, but they had never seen anyone stand up to it with such unshakable resolve. Schmidt sensed it too. He could feel the narrative slipping from his grasp. The silent jury of bystanders was no longer on his side, and it rattled him to his core. So he did what bullies always do when their power is threatened. He got louder. He got personal. "You think I don't remember you?" He spat, his voice thick with venom. "I remember you perfectly. Thought you were so much smarter than everyone else with your fancy college books. Thought the rules didn't apply to you. Well, let me tell you something. Nobody comes back to my town and disrespects the law." Amara crossed her arms over her chest, a simple, powerful gesture of defiance. "I'm not disrespecting the law, officer," she said, her voice clear and resonant. "I enforce it." He let out a short, derisive laugh. You? You don't enforce anything. You're a convicted felon. You have no rights here." Slowly, with deliberate, measured movements, Amara reached in her leather backpack. The tension at the bus stop became almost unbearable. Every eye was on her hand. Even the cars passing by seemed to slow down, their drivers craning their necks to see the unfolding drama. From the bag, she withdrew not a weapon, but a simple, black leather billfold. She flipped it open with a flick of her wrist. Inside, nestled against the dark leather, was a silver, shield-shaped badge and a laminated ID card. She held it up, her hand as steady as a rock. "Amara Vance," she announced, her voice ringing with an authority that dwarfed his own. "Investigator, State of Franklin, Division of Civil Rights." The silence that descended was absolute, as if a switch had been thrown and all the sound in the world had been cut off. The old veteran's jaw dropped. One of the women by the soda machine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The teenager with the phone instinctively took a step closer, zooming in on the badge. Cade Schmidt stared at the silver shield as if it were a venomous snake. His brain struggled to process the information, to reconcile the image of the broken girl from his past with the formidable woman standing before him. That's a fake," he stammered, the words automatic, devoid of conviction. Amara held it steady, letting him get a good, long look. "There's a number on the back of my ID," she said, her voice cold and precise. "You can call it and verify my credentials. I suggest you do it quickly, before you obstruct a state official in the performance of her duties." He didn't move. He couldn't. His face had gone a ghastly shade of pale, the blood draining from it as the full, horrifying reality of his situation crashed down on him. Every lie he had told, every report he had falsified, every time he had bragged about putting her in her place. It all came rushing back, not as a memory of triumph, but as a long list of indictments. He had never, in his wildest nightmares, imagined she would come back. And he certainly never imagined she would come back like this. 5 years earlier, the air didn't crackle with tension. It was thick with the smell of rain and the promise of a quiet Thursday night. There was no crowd, no audience, just the cold, isolating fear that wraps around your lungs and squeezes until you can't draw breath. Amara Vance had been 25, a graduate student at the State University, poised on the brink of a future she had meticulously planned. She was studying public policy, driven by a fierce, idealistic belief that she could help fix the broken systems of the world. She dreamed of working for a nonprofit, maybe even running for city council one day. She wanted to be a voice for the voiceless. On that rainy October evening, all of that was shattered. She had stayed late on campus, working with a study group on a midterm project. The buses were running behind schedule, the rain drumming a hypnotic rhythm against the windows of the nearly empty vehicle. She had her headphones in, listening to a political podcast, her notes spread across her lap. She was so engrossed in her world that she didn't notice when Cade Schmidt boarded at the downtown stop. He wasn't in uniform. He was wearing a tight-fitting polo shirt and jeans. But even in civilian clothes, he radiated an aura of aggressive entitlement. He wanted control, and when he saw a young black woman sitting in a seat near the front, a seat he arbitrarily decided was his, something inside him bristled. He walked over and stood over her, his shadow falling across her notes. She looked up confused, pulling one earbud out. "Can I help you?" "You're in my seat," he stated, not asked. Amara blinked, trying to process his demand. The bus was a cavern of empty seats. She could have counted at least a dozen open pairs. She wasn't being rude. She was genuinely baffled. "I'm sorry, my seat," he repeated, his voice sharper this time, laced with impatience. "Move." She glanced around at the empty bus, then back at him. "Sir, there are plenty of other." That was it. That was the moment her life veered off course. Her polite refusal was, in his mind, an act of defiance. He raised his voice, accusing her of being disrespectful, of having an attitude. The bus driver, a weary man who just wanted to finish his shift, pulled the bus over to the side of the road. Within minutes, Schmidt had escalated the situation to a full-blown confrontation. He grabbed her arm, claiming she had shoved him. He wasn't wearing a badge, but he didn't need one. In a town like Sterling Creek, everyone knew who Cade Schmidt was. And when he spoke, his word was law. Amara was pulled off that bus and slammed against its wet, cold side. The sting of handcuffs on her wrists was a shocking, brutal reality. The charge, assaulting a police officer. She spent the night in a holding cell, the fluorescent lights humming a maddening, endless tune. She was terrified, alone, and utterly bewildered. No phone call, no lawyer, just the smell of bleach and despair. By morning, the narrative had already been set. Local talk radio painted her as an entitled, aggressive student, a troublemaker. They fabricated a history of disciplinary problems, lies that spread through the town like wildfire. The truth didn't stand a chance. Her court-appointed lawyer was a man whose spirit had been crushed by years of unwinnable cases. He barely made eye contact, his gaze fixed on a spot on the wall just over her shoulder. He told her it was her word against a decorated officers. He advised her to plead guilty, to hope for a reduced sentence. He warned her that if she fought it, the system would crush her. Amara refused. She was innocent. She would not plead guilty to a crime she didn't commit. The trial was a 3-day farce. Cade Schmidt took the stand, a picture of calm authority. He lied with breathtaking ease. He claimed she had lunged at him, screamed obscenities, swung her fist. He said he had tried to de-escalate, that he had feared for his safety. He even produced a souvenir of the encounter, a large, purplish bruise on his forearm, a bruise Amara knew he'd gotten playing in the department's softball league 2 days prior. He claimed she had inflicted it. The jury was a portrait of the town's demographics. 9 white men, 2 white women, and 1 elderly black man who looked at Amara with eyes full of pity but said nothing. The rest of them stared at her with cold, impassive faces, their arms crossed, their minds seemingly made up before the first witness was even called. They deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty, 3 years. The judge, a man who played golf with Schmidt's father, wagged his finger at her from the bench. "Let this be a lesson to you," he intoned, his voice dripping with paternalistic condescension, "about the importance of respecting authority." He didn't look her in the eye when he banged the gavel, its sound sealing her fate. In the hallway, her mother collapsed into sobs. Her father stood stoic, his fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white. Her younger brother, a high school senior, just stared at the wall, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Amara was led away in chains. No chance to say goodbye, no time to process, no moment to breathe. The state correctional facility was a world of concrete and noise, a dehumanizing machine designed to strip away identity. Amara had never felt so small, so powerless. The clang of the cell, doors slamming shut behind her, was the sound of her future being erased. She learned quickly how to survive. Keep your head down, your mouth shut, and your eyes open. But in the crushing monotony and quiet terror of prison, she discovered something else. She learned that when you've lost everything, you have nothing left to fear. And when you stop being afraid, you become powerful. People like Cade Schmidt thrive on fear. Without it, they're just hollow men. In the prison library, a small, dusty room filled with cast-off paperbacks and outdated textbooks, Amara found her salvation. She discovered a section of old law books, their bindings cracked and their pages yellowed with age. She devoured them. She read constitutional law, criminal procedure, civil rights statutes. She memorized legal precedents and case law, her mind a sponge for the language of the system that had imprisoned her. She started helping the other women. She drafted appeals for inmates who had been railroaded by the same broken system. She wrote letters to innocence projects. She taught women how to file grievances. Some of them, women who had been locked away for years, walked free because of the arguments Amara pieced together from those old, forgotten books. She became a beacon of hope in a place designed to extinguish it. One day, a corrections officer she had befriended, a woman who saw the injustice in Amara's case, handed her an envelope. Inside was a letter of acceptance to a remote learning program for a degree in criminal justice. Her old public policy professor, a man who had always believed in her potential, had heard what happened. He had pulled strings, written letters, and paid the first semester's tuition out of his own pocket. For the next 2 years, Amara's cell became her classroom. She studied under the dim glow of a single flickering bulb, the sounds of shouting and slamming doors her constant soundtrack. She wrote essays on legal ethics while lockdowns raged outside her door. She studied through sickness, through grief, through the crushing weight of despair. She studied because it was the one thing they couldn't take from her. It was the one part of her life she could still control. The day of her release, there was no celebration. No family waiting with balloons. No triumphant walk through the gates. Just a gray, overcast sky and the crunch of gravel under her state-issued boots as she walked away. She was technically free, but the 3 years had left their mark, an invisible scar on her soul. She didn't go back to Sterling Creek. Her parents had moved to another state shortly after the trial, unable to bear the shame and the whispers of the town that had betrayed their daughter. So Amara went to the state capital, a sprawling, anonymous city where she could disappear. She rented a tiny, rundown apartment that always smelled of damp concrete and took a job washing dishes at a 24-hour diner. It was grueling, thankless work, but it paid the rent and left her days free. During the day, she continued her transformation. She finished her degree online, graduating summa cum laude. She started attending public hearings on police reform and civil rights panels. She would sit in the back of the room, a silent observer, taking meticulous notes, absorbing everything. Eventually, she found the courage to speak, not about her own story, but about the patterns of injustice she saw repeating themselves over and over. The first time she applied for a job at the State Division of Civil Rights, they turned her down. Her criminal record, though unjust, was a barrier. But Amara was relentless. She went back the next week and offered to volunteer. She answered phones, made coffee, filed paperwork, anything to get her foot in the door. A senior investigator, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Eleanor Whitaker, noticed her. She saw the fire in Amara's eyes, the fierce intelligence behind her quiet demeanor. One day, she called Amara in her office and asked her a single question. "Why are you really here?" Amara met her gaze without flinching. "Because I know what it feels like to have your truth silenced. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure other people get to speak theirs." Whitaker stared at her for a long, silent moment. Then she pushed a thick case file across the desk. "Prove it," she said. That was the beginning. Amara didn't just prove it. She excelled. Her unique perspective, her first-hand knowledge of the system's failings, made her an invaluable asset. Within a year, she was hired as a junior analyst. 2 years after that, she passed the rigorous state exam to become a certified investigator. The day they handed her the silver, shield-shaped badge, she didn't feel a sense of victory or revenge. She felt the immense weight of responsibility. She knew she couldn't change her past, but she could use it to build a better future for others. 3 months into her new role, she was reviewing a list of officers flagged for repeated civilian complaints. And then she saw it. A name that made the air leave her lungs. Officer Cade Schmidt, Sterling Creek PD. Misconduct, excessive force, racial profiling. A pattern of abuse stretching back years. All of it dismissed, buried, ignored. Her hand trembled as she moved the mouse. She could have passed the file to someone else. No one would have blamed her. But she didn't. She clicked Request Assignment and typed her own name into the box. She was no longer a victim. She was an investigator. And she was going home. Back at the bus stop, the world seemed to be holding its breath. Cade Schmidt's face was a canvas of disbelief and dawning horror. The silver badge in Amara's hand seemed to burn with a cold fire, a symbol of a reality he couldn't comprehend. "You're lying," he finally managed to say, the words catching in his throat. But the accusation was hollow, a desperate last stand against an undeniable truth. "I'm not," Amara replied, her voice as even and unyielding as granite. She slowly tucked the billfold back in her backpack, the gesture conveying a finality that was more powerful than any threat. The badge had done its job. It wasn't for show. It was a statement of fact. "That piece of tin doesn't mean a damn thing," Schmidt growled, trying to rally his shattered confidence. "It means I have the legal authority to be here," she corrected him calmly. "It means I am conducting an official investigation. And it means that if you lay a single hand on me or impede my duties in any way, that phone over there," she nodded subtly toward the teenager, who was still recording, his hand remarkably steady, "won't be the only evidence in the felony case against you." Schmidt's eyes shot to the teenager, then back to Amara. His breathing was shallow and rapid, the first visible sign of panic. The confidence he had worn like a second skin was peeling away, revealing the insecure bully underneath. "I knew you were trouble from the moment I laid eyes on you," he snarled. "Always walking around with that chip on your shoulder, thinking you're better than everyone else." Amara shook her head slowly, a flicker of pity in her eyes. "No, officer. I walk like someone who has been through fire and learned how to make friends with the flames. You think you could just come back here and play cop?" he spat. "I'm not playing," she said, her voice dropping, becoming more intense. "And I didn't come back to impress you. I came to observe. You're the one who just made this personal." She pointed a finger at him, her first aggressive gesture of the encounter. "You don't belong here." The words struck him with the force of a physical blow. His hand finally went to his radio, his fingers fumbling with the button. But before he could press it, the old man in the veteran's cap stepped forward. He moved with the slow, deliberate gait of age, but there was an undeniable strength in his posture. "I remember her," the old man said, his voice raspy but clear. 5 years ago. She was just a kid, and she didn't do a damn thing wrong then, either." Schmidt whipped his head around, his face contorted with rage. "You stay out of this, old man." But the veteran didn't flinch. He had faced far worse than a small-town bully. He simply stood his ground, a silent witness giving testimony. His courage was contagious. One of the women by the soda machine spoke up, her voice trembling but determined. "Isn't that the girl they arrested on the bus?" The college student. Her friend nodded, adding, "I remember. It was all over the paper. They said she attacked him." The tide was turning, and Schmidt could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet. He turned to the small crowd, his arms spread wide in a desperate appeal. She assaulted an officer of the law. She was convicted by a jury of her peers. Amara stepped forward again, her voice cutting through his bluster. "Convicted based on false testimony." "Your testimony? Are you calling me a liar?" he roared. "I'm not calling you anything," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing everyone to lean in to hear. "I'm just stating the facts, and the facts are all in here." She reached into her backpack one more time and pulled out a thin manila folder. She held it up, not opening it, just letting him see it. "I have 3 open and active complaints against you, Officer Schmidt, all filed within the last 9 months. One involves the excessive use of force against a minor. Another involves the racial profiling of a family during a traffic stop. Right on this very street." Schmidt stared at the folder as if it were radioactive. "I'm here to observe, to document, and to report my findings," Amara continued, her voice all business now. "You are not under arrest. But as of this moment, you are officially under investigation by the State Division of Civil Rights." He let out a choked, bitter laugh. "You think anyone in this town is going to believe you over me? This town has always had my back." Amara's expression didn't waver. "That was 5 years ago, Cade. Are you sure nothing has changed?" As if on cue, the teenager lowered his phone slightly. "It's already live streaming," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "People are watching." Schmidt spun around, his face a mask of fury. "You turn that off right now." "Nope," the boy replied, taking a step back. "First Amendment." Schmidt turned back to Amara, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with desperation. "You're playing a dangerous game." She leaned in, her voice low and intimate, for his ears only. "You already played it. You lost. I'm just here to collect." And then, just as the distant rumble of an engine announced the arrival of the 7:15 bus, she stepped back, her composure perfectly restored. The storm had passed. She had won. The bus arrived with a hydraulic hiss, its doors folding open like a welcoming embrace. Amara gave a small, respectful nod to the old veteran and the other onlookers, a silent thank you for their courage. Then, without a backward glance at the man she had just dismantled, she stepped onto the bus. The doors closed behind her, sealing Cade Schmidt in a world that was rapidly crumbling around him. He stood alone in the middle of the sidewalk, a statue of impotent rage, as the bus pulled away and disappeared down the street. The video, as the teenager had promised, was already spreading like a virus. Before the bus had even reached the next stop, the 3-minute clip titled, "Sterling Creek Cop Gets Owned by State Investigator," was being shared across every social media platform. The footage was raw and shaky, but the narrative it told was crystal clear. A bully with a badge had finally met his match. By noon, the story was the only topic of conversation in Sterling Creek. At the Cut and Comb barbershop, a group of old-timers stopped their game of checkers to watch the video on a cracked smartphone screen. "Well, I'll be," one of them muttered, stroking his chin. Always knew that Schmidt boy was a bad apple. At the town diner, waitresses huddled by the coffee machine, whispering and pointing at their phones. The whispers turned into a low buzz that filled the entire restaurant. People who had known Amara's family for years, people who had stayed silent during her trial, were now shaking their heads and murmuring about what a shame it had all been. The ripple effect reached the police station long before Schmidt did. The phone started ringing off the hook, first from local news outlets, then from regional ones. The chief of police, a man who had spent years sweeping Schmidt's transgressions under the rug, found himself fielding calls from the mayor's office and the state attorney general. When Schmidt finally walked through the station doors, the atmosphere was thick with a mixture of shock and schadenfreude. His fellow officers avoided his gaze. The dispatcher suddenly found her paperwork intensely interesting. His authority, once absolute within these walls, had evaporated. That evening, desperate to reclaim some semblance of control, Schmidt did what he always did. He went looking for an easy target. He spotted two black teenagers sitting on the steps of a closed storefront, sharing a bag of chips. He pulled his cruiser up to the curb, the tires screeching, and stepped out, ready to unleash the day's frustrations on them. "What are you two doing here?" he barked, his hand already resting on his holstered taser. The boys looked up startled. "Just chilling, man," one of them said. "You got a problem with that?" the other one asked, a hint of defiance in his voice. Schmidt's eyes lit up. This was what he needed. A confrontation he could win. "Stand up," he commanded. "Put your hands on the wall." "For what?" "We ain't doing nothing." "I said, on the wall," he roared, stepping forward. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, officer." The voice came from the shadows across the street. Schmidt froze, his blood turning to ice. Amara stepped out from the darkness, her phone held up, its camera recording. "You following me?" he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "Just doing my job," she replied, her voice calm and steady, documenting a pattern of behavior. "This looks a lot like harassment and intimidation. Wouldn't you agree?" The two teenagers stared, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had seen the video. They knew who she was. Schmidt stood there, trapped in the beam of his own headlights, exposed and powerless. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing he could say. She had him. He got back in his car and sped away, the sound of the teenagers' laughter chasing him down the street. Amara didn't laugh. She walked over to the boys, her expression serious. "You two okay?" she asked. They nodded, still stunned. "If he ever bothers you again," she said, handing them her card, "you call me, day or night." As she walked away into the cool night air, she knew she had done more than just expose a corrupt cop. She had given the community a weapon they never knew they had, a voice, and she had shown them how to use it. The combination of the viral video and Amara's meticulously documented report was a perfect storm that the Sterling Creek Town Administration could not ignore. The State Review Board, spurred by the public outcry and the undeniable evidence, convened an emergency hearing. Kate Schmidt was placed on administrative leave, a move that, just a week prior, would have been unthinkable. The reckoning was swift and decisive. Amara's report was a damning indictment, not just of one officer, a pattern of systemic failure. It detailed years of complaints that had been ignored, internal reviews that had been whitewashed, and a culture of impunity that had allowed a man like Schmidt to flourish. Within a month, the board delivered its verdict. Kate Schmidt was stripped of his badge and permanently dismissed from the police force. His career in law enforcement was over. He didn't show up to the final hearing. He simply vanished, packing up his life in the dead of night and leaving town, a disgraced ghost. His departure left a vacuum, but it was quickly filled by something new: hope. The town began to change, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. A local artist, inspired by Amara's story, painted a massive mural on the side of a brick building downtown. It depicted a powerful black woman, her face determined, holding a silver shield in one hand and a law book in the other. Underneath, in bold letters, it read, "Truth is the loudest voice." The mural became a local landmark, a symbol of the town's nascent transformation. Spurred by the community's newfound activism, the mayor's office announced the formation of a civilian-led police oversight committee, an independent body with the power to investigate misconduct and recommend disciplinary action. They invited Amara to be the keynote speaker at the committee's inaugural meeting. She stood at the podium in the packed town hall, not as a victim, but as a leader. She didn't speak of revenge or anger. She spoke of accountability, of the courage it takes to speak truth to power, and of the responsibility every citizen has to demand justice. Change doesn't happen because one person is strong, she told the silent, captivated audience. It happens when a community decides that the silence is no longer acceptable. After her speech, she was surrounded. People lined up to shake her hand, to thank her, to share their own stories of injustice. The old veteran from the bus stop was there, his eyes shining with pride. The two women from the soda machine were there, their faces beaming. Even the teenager who had filmed the video was there, looking at her with a newfound respect. In that moment, Amara realized she had done more than just take down a corrupt cop. She had helped the town find its conscience. She had returned to the place that had broken her, and, in doing so, had helped it begin to heal itself. The weight of the past was still there, but it was no longer a burden. It was a foundation, and on that foundation, something new and beautiful was being built. 6 months later, the corner of Oak and Elm was unrecognizable. The old, weathered bus stop bench was gone. In its place stood a modern, 2-story building of glass and reclaimed wood, its entrance flanked by newly planted flower beds. A polished bronze plaque by the door read, "The Amara Vance Justice Center." It was a community legal aid and outreach center, a place born from the ashes of injustice. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew a crowd that spilled out into the street. Local news crews set up their cameras, and the mayor delivered a speech about new beginnings. When it was Amara's turn to speak, she kept it brief. But when they handed her the oversized ceremonial scissors, she paused. She scanned the crowd until she found him, the old veteran from the bus stop, Mr. Henderson. "Mr. Henderson," she called out, her voice amplified by the microphone. "Could you please join me?" A murmur went through the crowd as the old man, with the help of his son, made his way to the stage. Amara handed him the scissors. "You were the first one to stand up," she said softly, for his ears only. "It's only right that you be the one to open the doors." With trembling hands and tears in his eyes, he cut the red ribbon. The crowd erupted in applause. The inside of the center was bright and welcoming, filled with the smell of fresh paint and possibility. The first thing visitors saw was a wall of photographs, not of politicians or donors, but of ordinary people from the community. In the center of the lobby, encased in glass, was the original wooden bus stop bench, its carved initials now preserved as a piece of history. The inscription beneath it read, "Where truth found its voice." Later that evening, long after the crowds had gone, Amara sat alone in her new office, her name in clean, simple letters on the door. The sun was setting, casting long, golden rays across the floor. On the wall opposite her desk hung her framed silver badge. It was a reminder not of a victory won, but of a promise made. A few days later, she found herself waiting for the 7:15 bus again. She stood on the same corner, but in a different world. She boarded the bus and, out of a sense of quiet ceremony, took the same seat by the window. As the bus pulled away, she looked out at the Justice Center, a beacon of light in the early morning mist. The bus rumbled through the streets of a town that was slowly, painstakingly, learning to be better. At the next stop, an elderly black woman with kind, tired eyes got on. As she passed Amara's seat, she paused. "I saw your name on that building," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I just wanted to say thank you." Amara smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Thank you for saying that." When she finally reached her stop, she stepped off the bus and into the bright morning sun. The fog had lifted. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was home. This story is a testament to the enduring power of truth and the quiet courage it takes to speak it. Amara Vance didn't return for revenge. She returned for justice. She reminded an entire community that silence enables injustice, but a single, steady voice can change everything. Her journey teaches us that our deepest wounds can become our greatest strengths, and that it's never too late to rewrite our own story, and in doing so, help rewrite the story of the world around us. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of second chances and the importance of accountability, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope is real. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that matter. And in the comments below, please share your thoughts, but above all, comment with respect. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being part of the conversation.